The Marines have a slogan: we're just looking for a few good men. Now, in the current climate of political correctness, they'll probably change that slogan. But I want you to know it's still an important thing for us to consider in terms of our Christianity. For God is looking for a few good men. Ezekiel chapter 22, verse 30. Here's the Lord speaking. So I sought for a man among them who would make a wall and stand in the gap before me on behalf of the land, that I should not destroy it. But I found none. Oh, what a difference a few good men could make in the church and the church's impact in the world. Ezekiel underscores this in our text that we just read. Here he pictures a city under siege, and the enemy has broken through the wall. There's a deadly breach in the defenses, and the only hope was for a stalwart soldier to stand in the gap. It's an accurate picture of what's happening in our time. The enemy's pouring in through our spiritual defenses, our families, our churches, our culture. They're being overwhelmed in the assault of Satan and his minions. The need is for an elite group of men sold out to Christ who will not waver. Ezekiel was that kind of man. These prophets of old afford an inspiring model for us. James exhorted, take the prophets for an example. Now, the prophet's example challenges us to be men of destiny. Ezekiel, the author of this book, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, and the rest, bore the title prophet. Now, we usually think of a prophet as someone foretelling the future. And though this element was often present, their office was primarily forthtelling the truth. A careful examination of their ministry shows that they did not speak only of future events, but confronted their contemporaries. The prophet had a word for the present hour. The Hebrew word for prophet is literally one who has been called. They had a mandate from heaven. It was a divine compulsion. Jeremiah described it as a fire in his bones. Now, this awareness of God's call imparts a sense of destiny. Oh, dear listener, God has you here in this time and place for a reason. It's not an accident, it's an appointment. The prophet had something to say. Society today's lost its moral compass. Our families are floundering at sea without an anchor, and churches drifting doctrinally without a steady hand on the helm of Scripture. Men, we must take up the sword of the Spirit and stand in the gap. But you see, the prophet's example challenges us further, not just to be men of destiny, but men of devotion. They were often referred to as the man of God. Oh, think about that. How that described a man's devotion to the Lord. He was possessed by the God who held him and obsessed with the God who loved him, a man of God. See, the prophet was God's man. This suggests an abiding fellowship. Now, brothers, do you shut yourself up with God to hear from Him in His Word and commune with Him in prayer on a consistent basis? Because the prophet was a man of God, he could not be bought. His convictions were not for sale. Now, the world believes every man has his price, but not God's man. So the prophet's example teaches us to be men of destiny, men of devotion, but something further, to be men of discernment. Another term for the prophet was seer, S-E-E-R, seer. That is, he could see beyond the natural realm and gain God's perspective. He could see the invisible with eyes of faith to discern the spiritual realities beneath the surface events. We need to be men of vision who see before others see more than others see, and see beyond what others see. He had a word for his time, the prophet did, the seer did, because he had a view of eternity. Let me ask you this important question. Will you be a man who stands in the gap? God is looking for a few good men.